Hey, this is Pete Lambert, otherwise known as Lucky Pete, and I come from London, Ontario. I'm currently living in Hamilton, the place where my parents moved to in 1979, and I moved here in 2008. I love this place. This is home for me, and I play the drums primarily, but I also play a little fiddle, and I'm also a DJ. I go out as DJ Lucky Pete. Yeah, I do a little dabbling in music in general. Like also teach drums too, and violin. I haven't taught violin for a long time, but drums I teach.
And bands?
Pardon me?
Bands you're in currently?
Bands. I play in a multitude of bands. I've been playing with the Kensington Hillbillys since 2002, and I'm still playing with them. We're working on new material. We're writing and rehearsing. There's also the offshoot band from that is the Parkdale Rebels, which is also with Steve Ketchen on vocals, and we do more of original country. There's Melanie Peterson, who I play drums with and sing with. She's a singer-songwriter who I've been with for probably 12 or 13 years now. Very different from, some of my music, but that's singer-songwriter is just a line of interest that I have had for many years. And so we have a good time. We're good friends, and there's also here in Hamilton I play with the Hellbent Rockers. Well-established rockabilly band. I just only joined them a couple of years ago, and since then I started a band I joined another offshoot band of the Hellbent Rockers called the Trebletones, and I'm the drummer with them. So that's Dave and Sharni Nikoloff and myself, and also currently playing and working on some new material with Shane Couture, making some skinhead reggae music, and I'm really excited about that. Yeah, and I sit in with a lot of other local bands. I always get a call if somebody can't make it or that kind of stuff. So I guess you could call me a session guy or whatever. But I also have my own solo song out, which is called Back in the Arms of Love, written by a good friend of mine, Dominic Simone. And it's something I worked on as a challenge because I've always been behind the scenes as a drummer, and I wanted to get out in front of the drums and do something and show that I could sing. And anyways, it took a long time, but we eventually recorded it last year, and it just only got released more recently, late last year. And so I'm pretty proud of that. A lot of good local musicians on that, all Hamilton people. I recorded at Westmoreland Studios in the East End, Carl Jennings. And it was a really fun project, and I've now got my own solo song, which is weird to say, My main influences, I would think would have to start with my parents, because my dad was actively playing in a band every weekend, bands, when I was growing up in the 60s. So and my mom and dad met when they were playing in the same band in 1948. Music was all around us. It was mostly jazz. My dad and my mom were jazz people, like Ella Fitzgerald and Count Basie and Duke Ellington and all that stuff. That's what I heard growing up. I didn't understand it at all. Had no idea what was going on there.
Yeah.
I just didn't get it. Never got jazz until I was older. I love it now, but back then, when the Beatles came on Ed Sullivan, I was Beatle crazed. I was only 2.5. So, but I was obsessed with the Beatles. There is a photograph of me out there with when I'm still 2, with a ukulele, singing "Yeah, yeah, yeah."
Nice.
She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I was obsessed with pop music as soon as I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and I do remember it.
Awesome.
You know, I was very young, but it made a very big impression on me. This crazy screaming and all this stuff. So yeah, I started right there, like boom. And once I was about 8 years old, the school board called me up and said I could start learning an instrument. So I started learning violin, and I started, I was classically trained violinist for a couple of years, and I became a violist when I was about 13. And I wasn't very fast with my left hand. I couldn't play and all that stuff. So quite often the viola plays a much slower and more almost like padding for the music. It's a little simpler. So I had really good intonation. So I ended up playing in the London Youth Symphony Orchestra, which was like the height of any child playing classical music in London, Ontario, was playing in this extraordinary orchestra. So, but that was right around the time I was getting into punk, and we're talking about influences here. I won't go into the punk thing yet, but one of our great mentors on the London, Ontario punk scene was a guy called Mike Niedermeyer. Niederman, sorry, Mike. Mike Niederman, and his other half used to hold like, parties for all the weirdos in town, like punks and art people and whatever, up in their loft. And he introduced me to a lot of really cool music that I never knew anything about. And, like we performed a John Cage piece of music. One night he had this thing where John Cage's idea was that each person has a radio and also a sheet of paper which says has numbers on it and dashes, long pauses and then short. So you kind of interpret it. You got your radio dial and you okay, start. So everybody goes to their first number, and then etc. And it is no set time, but you would just let it play out, as long as it would happen, and then played back, you start to hear patterns of rhythm, and all this really, you're like, what? Like, so together, this group of people going on radio dials, to different frequencies, create this incredible spontaneous piece of music, and that really turned me on to the sort of art rock scene, like the Velvet Underground, John Cale, and all that stuff really fascinated me after experiencing that and learning about John Cage and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, who was another 20th century master of weird music. But I really dug that stuff. I was really into it, and it seemed to fit in right with the punk thing. But like I became a big Clash fan, and when in about 1978, I was like 16, 17, and I idolized the Clash big time. And when I went to England, I was the biggest Clash fan going, and I thought one day I'll meet Joe Strummer because I'm in England, right? So I ended up meeting. It's a long story, but I ended up meeting Joe, and he was my biggest influence, like musically as a teenager, and then personally in the 80s when I was just in my 20s. We had some great conversations, and he really inspired me to be the best I could be, and that's kind of what he did with people. And people might get that impression having never met him from his music. Well, it's true.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, that's him. Music's very honest, and you're really seeing people that are young and have never met Joe and never could see the Clash idolize this guy. And they never even met him. But at the same time, like, I know why.
Yeah.
Because of getting to know him. And it was very real. And his inspiration to generations of people is a very real thing. To be creative, to do what you want, to say what you want, to, you know, contribute
Yep.
to culture if you want. If you don't, whatever. Like, but, you know, do your own thing. That was the whole punk aesthetic, you know. And I love that about it. I just love that. But, you know, and then there's so many people I met in England that influenced my life. Like, I started playing with Rico in about when was that? It was about 1989.
Okay.
Rico was in Jamaica for 7 years. And one day we were sitting around at Gaz's house, and we got a phone call from Chris Blackwell from Island Records. And he said, Gaz, I got Rico here. He's just come into town, and he's looking for bands to play with. And Gaz is looking over at me. And, oh, sure, yeah, well, send him over. What? So, the next thing you know, about 15 minutes later, Rico shows up at Gaz's house. Like the legendary Rico Rodriguez of, you know, Specials fame, but also if you know more about his career, he's played on about 2,000 records. So he's one of the truly great Jamaican musicians. And here we were sitting on the couch, sort of like looking at each other, like going, so, we just didn't know what to say to him. So, but Rico eventually started playing with the Trojans, and he also played with Bad Manners. He played with a lot of bands, actually. He sat in with a lot of ska bands at the time, because he just wanted to play, you know. And he was back on the scene, and those early days, he was playing with a lot of bands. But he played with the Trojans a lot, but then he asked me to join his own band. He started his own band in 1990. Never forget him asking me to be in his band, like to be the drummer for a reggae band, like a real reggae band. I was like, okay.
He was a big influence for sure.
Yeesh. And we became fast friends because I just could relate to him as a person, because he was very, very positive, like serious Rasta, very, very encouraging. Just a truly great man.
Yeah.
That I'm very proud to call a friend. You know, I mean, he died just a couple of years ago, but I did go to visit him when I was in England in 2003, and I went to his house and
Awesome.
had a nice visit with him. So you know, yeah, he's another big influence on my life and music.
Yeah.
Personally, you know,
Yeah.
like these people were personal influences as well as obviously. When I hear a Rico song now, like I hear him play, I'm just like, Rico,
Yeah.
nice, my man. So yeah, that's probably good. So what got me into punk? I tell you, Mickey DeSatis and I had a conversation about this about 5-6 years ago. We were saying how back in 75, 76, we all bought Circus magazine and Cream magazine religiously, or Rock Scene. There was 3 of them. Cream was the cool one because it had Lester Bangs and all that stuff, but writing for them. But that's where we heard about punk. You could not hear any punk anywhere.
It was all underground still.
All you did was we read about it, and we imagined how cool it was.
Yeah.
That was what we had to go on when punk started. just complete, just what those magazines were saying, and they were only really covering a little bit of it, like Patti Smith. You might get some Blondie. You might get Joan Jett got a lot of coverage because of the Runaways and stuff like that. She was always, cool, but there was always not too. And the English thing wasn't quite, kind of. You might have caught a little mention of some English band, or maybe the Heartbreakers when they first went over to England, or, So that's all we knew about punk. We'd never heard it. We didn't know anything about it. You couldn't hear it.
Yeah.
So would you as a kid, we just imagine this music and how great it is,
Yeah.
And that's literally how that's how I got into punk. Because it just seemed really cool, whatever, they were writing about. I was into Kiss at the time, and very much into Kiss, and my friends thought I was insane. I was into Kiss for, I think, when you're 13, 14, you might get into Kiss for 6 months or something like that, or, there's a mentality that they created that you get at a certain age.
Yeah.
Well, I carried it on a bit longer than I should have, probably. Probably a couple of years I was obsessed with Kiss. But then that punk thing, and I started seeing these articles about punk, and I was like, oh, what is this, And it just, and I can't remember the first record I ever heard. I think Eddie and the Hot Rods came to London, Ontario in 1977. And they played at a place called Fryfogel's. They did an in-store appearance at Records on Wheels in London, Ontario. And I went to that.
Nice.
I was maybe 15.
Yeah.
So I couldn't go to the show, obviously. But I got all their autographs.
That's awesome.
And I still got it. It's in my collection. So that was my first real experience with punk, real punk. There's these guys coming from England, and walking around them and looking at them, and they were all these weird haircuts, and it's wow, it's another planet, right? And they weren't even really punk, but we thought they were just a crazy R&B band, but we thought they were punk, and so that was my first kind of taste of that. And then that was off from there. You couldn't stop me. My other friends, they didn't follow me in. I went deep down into the deep end on the punk thing.
Yeah.
And I think the very first album I ever bought was the Ramones' first album.
Okay.
And that would have been in 1978. Mm-hmm. So a couple years after it came out. And I remember we thought it was pretty funny. We thought it was a lot of fun. Beat on the Brat just made us howl with laughter. Play that again! I can't believe somebody wrote a song called Beat on the Brat. What? This is so funny. We thought it was a laugh. We thought it was hilarious, So that was it, and then maybe the first Clash album was next, and maybe the Sex Pistols' first album. I bought all the kind of cornerstone albums as I could afford them.
Okay,
As a 15, 16-year-old.
Yeah.
The paper route, probably. So, but yeah, that was my introduction. And then I ended up working at Records on Wheels myself when I was about 17, 18, 19, something like that.
Yeah.
I worked at Records on Wheels, and we were getting all the imports in from England, so we were hearing everything.
Yeah.
It just was a deluge at that point. And by 79, when I started working there, all we ever did was play all the punk albums that were coming from England in the store. We never played any of the normal stuff.
Nice.
We were all addicted to all this new music that was coming out. All the guys that worked in there. So, I did that for a couple of years, and that was... I got to see a lot of shows in that period, 79 to 81. I could say Teenage Head was probably the greatest live band I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, nice.
From that period, late 78 into 80, when I saw them at Heatwave in August, that was incredible. They were the most incredible band you could ever go see live. They were the loudest, the most chaotic, with Frankie crawling all over the place, hanging off beams from the ceiling, and floating through the audience or whatever he was doing. It was just non-stop chaos with Frank, and I just worshipped Nicky, the drummer, was my man. He was incredible power, coming from the rhythm section. Steve Munn. I mean, it's just what a band. Gordy. They used to bring their own PA. It was so loud. It was like you were consumed by Teenage Head, absolutely consumed by them, and the energy was so high. The only thing I could compare it to was I saw AC/DC with Bon Scott in 1978 at Cobo Hall. They were opening for Aerosmith, and that's the most electrifying band I've ever seen live.
Okay.
Like, way up there, like the greatest show you'd ever like to see in rock and roll. I mean, they were on. My first concert, I went to see when I was 12. It was Brownsville Station at Centennial Hall in London, with April Wine opening up. And that was the first time my friend Cam and I ever smoked a joint. One was passed down our row, and it got passed to Cam, who looked at me and took a puff, passed it on to me. I was like looking at him like, we were 12, right?
Yeah.
Next person, like, well, I don't know. Like, oh, okay. So that was the first puff we ever took, either of us, Cam and I. So, then the second concert was only a few months later, and that was Kiss and Rush. So it was Kiss's first album tour.
Okay.
With Rush with their original drummer. That was in July. And so that year was 72 was the big, or 70, what was that? 74 was my first concerts. But I could also say that my very first concert was my babysitter took me to see Brenda Lee at the Western Fair in 1969.
That counts.
And also around that time saw Kenny Rogers in the First Edition at the fair. The Stampeders, great Canadian band. There was it was quite the concert venue there at the Western Fair.
And then your first punk show?
First punk show was the Demics at the Knights of Columbus in London, Ontario, which got me hooked.
Yeah.
The chaos and the energy of the music was too much, and then I ended up seeing, somehow, I don't remember when I first saw Teenage Head, but I believe it was that same year in the winter, 78, 79 was certainly the first time I ever saw Teenage Head, and that changed my life forever, seeing the Demics and Teenage Head. So what are some of my favorite shows? Obviously my, first one was just so impressionable, and Kiss, Kiss was crazy. But, through the years, Todd Rundgren opened up for, Utopia opened up for Blue Oyster Cult in London. And we were already massive Todd Rundgren fans. Like, I think London was probably his biggest fan base or something, because when he came out on stage, I mean, they only had a half an hour, and he could not get a word in because people would not stop cheering between each song. And I've never seen that before or since. Yeah. They wouldn't let him talk because the people were so happy to see him, and he just couldn't believe it. He was overwhelmed. And it was a great show, and that was really special. Oh, that was one of the really amazing shows that I saw when I was a kid. When I was let's see, what else is there? Another one that comes to mind, random, is Los Lobos. First ever show, I think, in London was at a place called Dingwall. It's a very famous bar. Still going. It's a different room, but it's, anyways, it's the same. It's still a venue called the Dingwalls. And they played for about 3 hours straight to, I would say, estimate about 15 people.
Nice.
And they played like there was 100,000 people in there. They were awesome. Like, I mean, really awesome. And we danced for 3 hours. We just danced and danced and danced. And everybody was there, just loved every minute of it. And the band didn't care who was there or not. It was just, oh my God, it was so spectacular. Going to see, when I was visiting England in 1999, and I happened to be there. The very last night I was going to be there was Joe Strummer's homecoming show with the Mescaleros, the first time he'd played with the Mescaleros in London. And I was told all week that I could not get into it. There was just no way I could be even put on the guest list or whatever.
Wow.
And I was absolutely like, this is ridiculous. Everybody I know is going to the show, and I can't go. So it was a Saturday night. So on that Saturday, Gaz and I were walking down Portobello Road, and he disappeared into a restaurant for a minute, and I just stood around like watching people. It was a market, lots of things to look at. And he comes back out of the restaurant, and he goes, "You're in." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You're into the show tonight." I was like, "What?
Wow.
Are you kidding me?" He says, "No, I just talked to their manager or whatever." And he says, "You're in." And I was like, "Oh, what?" So I got to see Joe's first gig with the Mescaleros in London, which was in '99. And it was spectacular. I mean, it was unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Especially as a finale to my stay there, It's just. Now, one thing, I do have a gripe about that because I ended up going down on the floor and I lost my spot going upstairs. I couldn't go back upstairs where I was going to go into the backstage area. They wouldn't let me up. There's no way. So I went to the bar next door and waited for Gaz to come out. He eventually came out, but I ended up hanging out with Billy Bragg.
Oh, shit.
Because he was there. Everybody was there. It was like Joe playing in London, homecoming. I'm telling you, it was special night. But I ended up talking to Billy, who I knew from years before, like when he first started. Because when I was going to see Billy when nobody knew who he was.
Yeah.
And same with the Pogues. The Pogues were also a band that I witnessed from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Just watched those bands when there was literally nobody there.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty cool too. Though watching the Pogues always was very special. Especially in the early days, the early band was just it was pure punk rock. It was like, Andrew was playing the floor tom and the snares. It was just going. It was like really, really primitive, right? And it's so primitive, and they were primitive. That was the great thing about the Pogues, is that they had that punk spirit, but they were doing this incredible, Irish music. It was just nuts. Like it was, never heard anything like it.
Yeah.
What? They started a whole genre doing that stuff.
Yeah.
Dropkick Murphys and the Mahones, and it wouldn't exist without the Pogues doing that stuff. But I was there when they started, and it was exciting to watch. It was really exciting to see them get successful too. And not talk to me anymore. So. Well, craziest stuff that ever happened at shows. The first time I ever played in Amsterdam was at the Paradiso with the Angelic Upstarts. And it was a packed house. The place holds about 1,000 people. I mean, it was really rammed, and it was all skinheads. And I saw some of the most violent battles I've ever seen that night. I can't even, it's chaos. Just like hundreds of kids just in a giant fight, you know, down at the front. And of course, you know, everybody at the front in the front row is spitting at the band, right? Because that was part of the kind of cool thing back then. So you had all these kids down the front just horking up big gobs and spitting at like Menzie. I remember looking over when I was playing, and Tony Feedback, our bass player, got so sick of this one person spitting at him that he went down right in front of him, horked up a big one, and just spit right in the kid's face. You know, I think he eventually kicked him as well, this kid. Oh, the violence that night, crazy. But here's the thing. So there's all this craziness going on. Menzie's trying to calm everybody down, right? It was chaos. And I was standing up on my drum platform, just sort of standing there, and all of a sudden, about 4 feet from my head, a cherry bomb went off. Someone chucked a cherry bomb at me, and it went off about 4 feet from my head. I'm not kidding, because I saw it happen. It was flash, just went right over here, and it scared the frickin' life out of me. Like, I have never jumped. So I was like frightened for my life at that point of all this violence going on. So craziest thing, when you say what's the craziest thing, and you know, that's chaos. In Rotterdam, on the same tour, we were playing to a much smaller crowd, but at about halfway through the show, we didn't know what was going on outside, but it was a full-on riot outside between the right-wing skins and the left skins. And all of a sudden we were playing a song, and the doors at the back of the hall burst open, and there was about 40 police poured into the whole place. Like riot police with their shields and all that stuff, right? And we immediately dropped our instruments and went down below the stage, which was where the green room was, and locked the door. And that was it for the show. That was it was done. And I think we only played like 4 or 5 songs or something at that point. You know, so there was that, and then there was the time the Trojans played in Berlin, and we played an anti-fascist a show, and there was a full-scale riot with thousands of kids. Like, it was nuts. I've never seen a sight like it. We couldn't leave until they cleared the streets properly, and then they escorted us through the streets with burning cars, burning signs, billboards, overturned cars. We went through all this to go to our van till we go back to the hotel. Jesus. It's like, you want to talk about crazy shit. This is the crazy shit that I experienced as a kid. So, yeah. So, all of my bands from start to current. So the first band I had was with my friend Cam Grant, called Cruiser. And we started when we were in grade 8, but we really ended up playing a lot of grade 8 shows when we were in grade 9. So that was my first foray into music, and I was the singer. I didn't play drums then. And we just did covers of the current rock hits of the day, like, you know, "Show Me the Way" by Peter Frampton, and "You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet," things like that. So yes, we played all those, and "Keep on Rockin' Me, Baby" by Steve Miller, and all that stuff. We did a lot of the hits of the day. But then I got into punk, and I ended up joining NFG, and in February 1979, I went down into the the basement with them and did my audition and got the gig. And the next week I think we were probably opening for, I don't know, the Demics or Teenage Head or somebody like that. But I was 17. I just got kicked out of school.
Yeah.
I got kicked out of my high school. And Central High. And thanks, guys. No, it was great. But then I ended up joining this punk band, and then I joined the punk band first. So I got kicked out of school in March, so I joined the band in February. So yeah, it was perfect timing because we were playing a lot. So, and then we recorded an album. An album came out in 1980, which is being reissued very soon on vinyl through Tony Lima, who used to run the Call the Office venue down in London. He's reissuing our album on vinyl, so that's coming out soon. The next band I ended up joining was the Angelic Upstarts when I moved to England, on the strength of NFG, actually. That my demo tape included NFG songs, and they thought I could handle it. I didn't. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But, you know, that was a short-lived gig because it's a weird thing how that ended because Menzie, it's called vernacular. So in England, when you say that something is next week, we say, no, it's this week.
Yes. Yep.
So I got that wrong.
Yep.
And I missed a gig. And I got fired probably around 5 or 6 o'clock that evening. The gig was later on, obviously. On the phone by Menzie telling me to fuck off. Last I heard from Menzie for some time. But yeah, it was literally because of a stupid thing like that. Yeah. Of course it would have been. It was at the 100 Club.
Okay.
I had never played at the 100 Club before. The 100 Club is a famous, you know, world famous club. And it was stupid. Anyways, after that, I ended up answering another ad in Melody Maker for a band called The Flips. And they were like a sort of dreamy pop band. And I played with them for about a year. We did demos, we played around a lot. The bass player from Madness, Mark Bedford, was our sort of champion. He was trying to get people to listen to us. Very much a Camden Town, North London band. Girl singer, really cool music, but just never got off the ground. They did eventually do an album without me, but the next thing I ended up doing was playing in a busking band called the Spartans. And the Spartans played around on the streets for about 2 years solid.
Okay.
84 to 86. And I heard that. Oh. So that we did while I was playing with other things too. I played in a band called Lash Lariat and the Long Riders. I joined them on January 1st, 1985. I remember that because I got a call from the fiddle player who I lived with saying the drummer didn't want to show up to this gig. Can you fill in? 10 days later we were in BBC Maida Vale Studios doing a John Peel session.
It must have been next week, that's why.
Yeah, January 10th, I got the date written down. We did our first John Peel session. I knew John Peel was a fan of the band, and I knew the future was pretty good with this group. And they immediately invited me to play with them full time, because they, nothing against Clive, but Clive, was a young guy, and he didn't quite know what he's doing. I was a bit more, seasoned, let's say. And Lash Lariat. We did 2 BBC sessions. We toured all over England twice that year. Very busy. And then I met, around that time I met Gaz, who was, the busking band I had was made up of 3 members former members of a band called Gaz's Rebel Blues Rockers. And I had never met Gaz, but I knew from them talking about him that Gaz was the son of John Mayall, the great Blues Breakers singer and leader. And I thought, well, that's really cool, you know. And I never really thought about, you know, whether I'd meet him or not, because they're, you know, sort of split up and all that stuff. But then one day we were playing in Hyde Park, and Gaz came along and sat in with us playing the melodica. He'd like to play the melodica. So we had this little 5-piece bucking band, and he came in and played along, and then he invited us over to his place. And from that point on, I was kind of hanging out with Gaz forever. The whole time I was in England. From that day on, we became very fast friends, and he formed a record label called Gaz's Rock and Records with the help of Joe Strummer's success with The Clash. Joe lent him the money to start that record label, and so I benefited eventually by joining the Trojans, which is Gaz and me and a guy called Andrew Crawford originally. And we started a band called the Trojans, and we started recording in 1988. And yeah, I owe a lot of things to Joe Strummer, but the Trojans went on to make, I'm on 8 albums, I think 9 now, you know. So Joe was responsible for giving me my sort of the bulk of my stay in England, and my musical experience was largely provided by Joe. Forever grateful, you know, such a big influence. Next thing came along, I ended up playing with another band called the Wise Monkeys, playing weddings. And that was with a guy called J.C. Carroll, who was still is the leader of the Members, the band The Members.
Yep.
And he had this side band all along in different forms, different musicians, but I ended up joining the Wise Monkeys. And that was just like literally a wedding band and an event band. We didn't really play around or weren't serious.
Yeah.
It was all covers.
Yeah, okay.
But it was like all these top musicians like Chester Kamen, Guy Pratt on bass, who was then playing with everybody like Floyd and stuff like that. But he was like friends, those guys were all friends with Andrew Crawford, who I was also playing with in the Trojans. Andrew Crawford eventually joined me playing with the Rico band. I ended up playing with Rico in 1991. For about a year, a little over a year, we played together. I did festivals and played we played in Europe, and so I had the Trojans, the Wise Monkeys, and Rico. And then it was around that time, I was so busy that Dougie started giving me a call from Bad Manners. This is the singer of Bad Manners, Buster. And he was like, you do a gig, we need a drummer. And I was like, oh yeah, sure, oh, great, wow, okay. So we did rehearsals, and we ended up, my first gig with them was at a university in the middle of Spain. That we arrived 20 minutes after 8, our show time. So we literally got out of the bus, changed into our clothes, got our instruments out, walked up on stage about 8:30, like 10 minutes later, and Hera was playing to like 500 screaming fans, you know, waiting to see Bad Manners, and that was my first gig. Baptism of fire in a large way. Whew. But Nick Welsh, who was the bass player at the time, he's called King Hammond as a solo artist, but Nick really helped me get through it. It was tough, but Rico was playing with us at the time, and it was a great experience playing with Bad Manners.
That's awesome.
I also, the very last gig I did in England was with Laura Lakin, the great Jamaican singer. He needed a drummer for the gig, and I sat in, and that was my very, very last gig in England, 94. So when I came back, I ended up joining a alt country band called Crybaby.
Oh, okay.
And we started to play around Toronto a lot and got a lot of notoriety. Went down and played in South by Southwest. We were kind of the darling band for Toronto, and that went on for a couple of years. Eventually, that split up, and I started playing with Kim Deschamps, who was the steel guitar player of Blue Rodeo here in Hamilton. We played around Hamilton a lot, and I was living in Waterdown at the time. And after that, I needed a band. In 2001, I asked my buddy in Toronto if he knew a band that might be good for me. He told me about the Kensington Hillbillys.
Yeah.
So that's just early 2002 I started playing with the Kensington Hillbillys. And I've been with them ever since. We're still playing to this day. Still playing a new album. And really enjoy playing with those guys. They're awesome. And also, I think I mentioned my current bands on the first question, didn't I?
Yeah, there's also The Strike.
Oh, of course,
There's
yes.
the current band, yeah.
So The Strike came along when I met Fergus MacLeod in London, Ontario. I was living in London, Ontario. He fronted a band called The Strike in Scotland in the early 80s. But he had emigrated to Canada. And he knew that I was with the Upstarts, and so we got friendly, and I always urged him to, let's get the band together, man, let's do something, And he resisted for a couple of years, like good 2 or 3 years. We'd see each other now and again and say hi and that sort of thing. But eventually he just went, okay, let's do this,
Nice.
So I went and asked Chris Crash.
I'm glad you did do it.
Yeah, went to ask Chris Crash if he was interested in playing with.
Yeah.
He would, if he knew The Strike. Maybe would he be interested in playing guitar? He was
knows.
I think he's about fell over. He says, "What do you mean
He
You mean Skinhead Strike?
He told me the story.
Gang warfare? What? Yeah. Oh, what? Yeah. What? What do you mean? Like, he was just completely flabbergasted. But there we were, and then we started rehearsing in the basement there, and ended up doing shows, and had such a great time opening up for all the great punk bands, UK Subs, Cockney Rejects, Agnostic Front, I don't know, Paranoid Visions.
Lions Law too, you did.
Lions Law, wow.
Yeah.
Lions Law are awesome.
That was a good show.
Well, they were on the
I filmed
the Rejects show in Toronto.
No, I filmed that one too.
Were they on that show? They weren't they on that show?
No, there was Velvet Underground in Toronto with The Strike and Lions Law.
Oh, I'm confusing the gigs.
Yeah, that Rejects, yeah,
The Strike, yeah.
opened up too, and also the Hollywood show was 2 days after.
Yeah.
I did film Toronto and Hamilton. I
Yeah.
filmed both shows. Yeah.
Anyways, the Rejects were beyond amazing. They were,
Yeah.
wow. My friend Sweets, he thought it was he still thinks it's one of the greatest shows he's ever seen in his life. So it was kind of like that.
Yeah.
It was just awesome.
Yeah.
It was the energy in the room was, you could cut it with a knife. It was just
Amazing.
amazing. Whole place was going insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, great band, great guys. But anyways, that's The Strike, yeah, and that's in the past now. So Fergus is off living in Western Canada and semi-retired, it seems.
Yeah.
But anyways, great experience playing in Europe and playing in the States, and
Yeah.
played with Infra Riot in Philadelphia. And yeah, and Tom and I are still friends. The drummer, Infra Riot was awesome, and we had a great time with those boys, and just got to meet so many great people from the world of punk, and it was really a joy. What I like about being a musician and what I dislike about being a musician. I don't know if I could do anything else with myself.
Yeah.
I, you know, just what I like most about being a musician. I just like the camaraderie, and it's like the teamwork, and the interaction between the team, and it's almost like a sports side. You know, it's like you're all working for the same to win the audience over. You know,
Like a brotherhood.
yeah, and sisterhood.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I've done plenty of bands with women. Oh, I forgot the Rivals. There's another band I played with in the late '80s. Was a country band. Great band with Jackie Callis, the sister of Joe Callis from Human League.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And she's still a really good friend, but I haven't seen them for a long time. But dear friend on Facebook still, and I'd love to see those guys again. Anyways, that was a really cool band.
So what do you dislike the most?
What do I dislike the most about music? Probably traveling,
Yeah.
being in vans,
Politics.
politics. Yeah.
Or band politics.
Or dealing with traveling with Bad Manners was a nightmare because of their trumpet player Alex. Alex was this African guy who was never shut up, never, always talking and taking the piss out of everybody, and he never stopped. Everybody just be like, "Shut up, Alex! Shut up!" You know, it's just like you couldn't get away from him because he was just loud, and he was like, oh my God. And yeah, I remember Alex. Alex was a great player, but he was a fucking pain in the ass. You know, so there's always people like that, you know. When you're traveling, you got to deal with people at close quarters. It's not easy, you know. So my favorite food is, most of my family will attest to this, is peanut butter. Peanut butter has been a staple in my life from day one, when I refused to eat anything other than peanut butter, and it had to be made by my sister Barb. Because she always put butter on it, and I liked with butter and peanut butter, and I don't know, just the way she made them was just right. So, and then later on in life, I learned to love Indian food.
Nice.
And the first time I ever had Indian food was on the road with Angelic Upstarts in Sheffield, and they took me to after our gig. We went to an Indian food place that they frequented quite regularly. It was my first time, of course, and Menzie tricked me into trying some vindaloo. It's the really hot stuff, which I said more often than not during the day that I wasn't interested in eating spicy food, but I'll try some mild stuff. So he said, "Oh, no, try this. No, you'll like it. It's great." Chicken vindaloo, just the hottest thing that I'd ever experienced on my tongue ever in my life, because I wasn't used to that kind of thing. But you know, you learn to love Indian food when you're living in England. Let me tell you that, because it's pretty much is English food now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, my useless talent is this.
Nice.
Thanks to Steve Renwick for having me, and hope you learned something or didn't learn anything. I don't know. We'll find out. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Pete.
Yeah.